It is only a matter of weeks since world football was looking forward with great anticipation to an exciting climax to major continental and domestic competition seasons, as well as marquee tournaments such as Olympic football, the Copa America, and Euro 2020. Instead, life in Ghana and all over the world has been turned on its head by the rapid spread of the novel coronavirus. Football has been brought to a halt at both Ghanaian and international level. The Ghana FA, CAF, FIFA, and other sporting federations have been forced to postpone all club and national team competitions until further notice. And yet, while football has been on hibernation and showing its beating heart, the soft chords of revival are being heard from Germany's Bundesliga, the Faroe Islands, and further east from South Korea. The common refrain is that things will never be the same, but to what extent will it affect the game? Today's show is to explore as many strands of this as possible. Welcome to Ghana's leading weeknight program. Welcome to PM Express.
4.8 million people worldwide have been confirmed as COVID positive. Heartwarmingly, 1.7 million people have recovered, but the macabre detail is that 319,000 people have died. Football has a large consistency worldwide, but there are not, or there have not been any confirmed deaths that we know of in the sports. Surely, there's a lot to look forward to tonight, and definitely that's where we're putting this on to. Welcome once again to the PM Express on Joy News, everywhere you're watching us around the world.
Time to introduce our guest then. Yes, because beginning from our own shores, a name synonymous with football in Ghana, over 3 decades of being in our living rooms, providing us with rare highlights, the longest reigning host of the nation's flagship highlight show from 1992 until 2000 blue. The legendary Kwabena Yeboah has bestraddled the sports broadcasting sphere in this country like a colossus, and as constant as the Northern Star, he seems to shine brighter with years anew. He's also the president of the Sports Writers Association of Ghana. We in the industry, we simply call him the writer. Welcome to Joy News, Bra Kwabena.
Thank you very much, Guy. Well, for my preliminary comments, let me say that today is one of my happiest days. I'm so elated to be on the same platform with personalities I've always regarded. Jury, champion, Robert Marawi, personalities I've always respected. On the international scene, they've brought some poetic commentary to our rooms, and quite apart from enjoying the players, they are part of the reason we enjoy these matches. So I'm very, very excited to have all these personalities this evening on PM Express. And let me say that this new tsunami in the form of this corona pandemic is really devastated the whole world, Ghana no exception. And these are very abnormal times that are beginning to feel normal. We are compelled to accept that as normal. We've been devastated. Those of us in the sporting world in Ghana, a number of my colleagues suddenly have lost their jobs. Those who are even working have had pay cuts. It's very, very tough as we speak. As you know, that for the first time, the Sports Writers Association of Ghana Award ceremony, which has run for 45 years for the first time, has been postponed. And it's a big blow to all of us. In a way, we're trying to play our part. And there's a reason that our clubhouse, bequeathed to us by our forebears, is being given to the state to serve as an isolation center, as a widow's mite to the fight against this pandemic. And over the period, we've tried to survive. For example, on my own sports show, Sports Allies, because we've struggled to have content because there's no football, I've been compelled to speak to real actors of the games over the weeks. I've had the privilege of speaking to the likes of Ebed Mensah and great footballers like Siki Akono, who is now the manager of the Black Stars, Stephen Appiah, Samuel Sekufo only last week. So we're trying to manage, trying to cope with the new normal, and I'm hoping that we will get better and better.
Bra Kwabna, thank you very much for the intro, as only the writer can do. Anyway, we'll come to him pretty shortly. Staying on the continent, a man who defines the well-worn phrase, large and in charge. Now, if you see the man they call down there in Tate, in person, he's physically imposing. But it's not just his physique that gets your attention. His voice is tall, and it speaks in miles rather than yards. A face we've grown to love to usher us into the world's biggest competitions, especially in football, from South Africa to the rest of Africa and the world. Robert Marawa, welcome to your second home, that is Ghana. Welcome to Joy News.
Thank you so much, Gary. What a pleasure, absolute pleasure. Welcome everybody that's part of the panel. Welcome everyone that's watching around the world. It is very trying times, and I do accept the invitation to be on the show, because Africa right now is searching for answers. The world is searching for answers. We're trying to get back to playing football, but obviously football, as we've come to know, at times does take a bit of a backseat. It takes a bit of a backseat. Why? Because it's about the human lives. It's about the interaction of humans that have to play football that decide the gathering. You saw over the weekend, as far as the Bundesliga is concerned, there was an attempt of football as far as playing behind closed doors. And I think it'll be quite interesting to hear from the panel what they thought about that. But it was a step, I suppose, in trying to get football back. We'll try and match that with what the FIFA chairman of the medical facilities had to say. If you go back to April the 20th, when he made a statement about when he thinks football should come back, and whether or not we are starting to push the boundaries a little bit more, simply because the numbers are not going down. When you look at it globally, they are going up. And in South Africa, they're going up. I think yesterday we had probably one of our sharpest spikes here in South Africa, since the start of the lockdown that we are currently having right now. But I just think all in all, it is calling for all of us somewhat, Gary, to dig a little bit deeper, to say this game that we love so much, this game that we've all treasured so much. You played the clip, 2010 FIFA World Cup, the voice of Peter Drury, John Champion as well, all a part of it. What happens now? Because we can never give up on the game. We need to find ways and solutions to see how we can get the players back, how we can get the fans back. But is it something that's going to happen anytime soon? I don't think so.
With two introductions out of the way, I'll go to George Addo Jr. to continue the rest.
All right, so our next guest on the show, he displays a very unique commentary style with an equal balance of witty remarks. He is certainly one of the best in the business. His commentary style, coupled with a knack of saying the right thing at the right time, has made him a household name to viewers worldwide. Now, eloquent and exceedingly listenable, he is been one of the hardest working football commentators the United Kingdom has produced over the last 3 decades. These days, he is in the United States as ESPN's lead commentator for the MLS. Ladies and gentlemen, John Champion. Hello, John. How has COVID-19 treated you so far?
Well, it's been a strange experience. It's been a tragic experience in so many ways, watching the pain and the suffering of so many people around the world. And yet I have to confess that from my own selfish family point of view, it's been a pleasurable experience in the sense that it's allowed me and my wife and our 4 children to be back under the same roof together as a family for the first time in 5 or 6 years. They're growing up. They largely moved away from home. They're either at university or in the world of work. So that's been a big plus for us to spend some quality family time together. But I just wish it wasn't in these awful circumstances. And whilst I treasure the moment when football does come back properly with full stadiums, I would tend to agree with Robert that is some way off at the moment. I look at the debates over whether professional football should be returning at the moment, and I tend to think, yes, they've got to take their chance along with every other industry. It's just the way that they come back and the motivation for them coming back? Is it purely financial, or is it to entertain the masses? Maybe it's both. So there are lots of issues for us to discuss over the next hour, hour and a half, I think. And at the moment, it's just nice to have some live football to reflect upon, and great credit to the Bundesliga and the authorities in Germany for getting to the stage where they could put some professional football on at all.
Perfectly. Wow, John, we're going to certainly have a wonderful night. Gary, I don't know if you have a few comments there for John?
No, we have 90 minutes of that. We've exhausted some, but there are too many questions for John Champion, and we will exhaust them. You have one more introduction to do, George.
And Gary, yes, a very special introduction as well. The next guest is particularly adept, at capturing the mood of a match and transmitting it, to those watching alongside at home. A highly articulate man, excellent at summoning the right words at the right time, routinely keeping his composure to deliver lines which are both elaborate and accessible. His absence on social media is hardly felt, because almost every big game, or every day these days after every big game, football fans are talking about his description, even though he insists we should focus on the game and not him. Great man joining us. Good evening to you, the voice, Peter Drury, and welcome to Joy News. How have you, or what have you been up to these days with COVID around?
It's been a very similar experience to the one that John has described, actually, for me. Like him, I feel a degree of guilt, actually, at looking from my relatively privileged perch out at a world that is feeling so much pain and angst and going through the mill to the extent that it is. For me, too, it's been really a very gentle couple of family months. My nest was also empty, but a couple of my now young adult sons are back with us, and I've enjoyed having their company. I also miss the buzz of football, the thrill of it, the extent to which it's the rhythm of my life. But as has already been articulated, that is a relatively unimportant factor in all of our lives, actually. And it was so interesting to see some professional football back at the weekend. Like a lot of people, I watched most of the Bundesliga card and thoroughly enjoyed it. But I wonder how long I would be able to enjoy it in that form, so denuded of the atmosphere that we come to take for granted and which we as commentators ride upon. And it won't feel real until it's properly real again, and there are tens of thousands of people attending these huge event football matches.
Thank you very much, Peter Drury. A lot more to come from Peter. There's John Champion as well. We've got Robert Marawa and Kwabena Yeboah. Gary, the lineup is complete.
It is complete indeed. It is not a starting 11 by any chance, but it is a starting 6. For a 6-a-side, can you name any 6-a-side anywhere in the world right now, at this point, at this hour, at this moment, at this very, very, very studio that can beat this lineup? I bet not. This is PM Express. You can hashtag PM Express on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. The show begins right after this. Thank you for staying with us on PM Express on the Joy News channel, available on DSTV 421, GoTV channel 144, streaming on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube. We really appreciate your time, and also the hashtag for all your questions for Kwabena Yeboah, Peter Drury, John Champion, and Robert Marawa is PM Express across all platforms. So let's begin the show proper. Football after COVID-19. We do know, as George mentioned, that quite a number of people have passed away, 319,000 people and over. But the football economy is going to be greatly affected in many, many ways. Kwabena Yeboah started by giving us an incredibly succinct and accurate bird's-eye view of what the situation in Ghana is. But just today, we've heard that, for example, the Premier League has faced a setback because some players have recorded, have been, tested positive with the novel coronavirus as well. This puts their plans to start the league in June somewhat in jeopardy? And that's where we begin the conversation. First of all, to the SWAG president, Kwabena Yeboah, I know that even though you don't cover the Premier League directly, you have been bringing it into our homes for more than 3 decades. From where you sit here in Ghana, did you realistically think that the Premier League could really start, you know, in the first week of June or in June as they wanted? And what do you make of the news that some players have already tested for the virus as at now, Kwabena?
I think it's going to come as a very massive blow to the Premier League with plans that are going to start in June. Massive blow. They were hoping that, because at the end of the day, it's not only a question of just looking at the health side, they're looking at economics as well. So a number of these teams, I'm sure, are losing so much money. Lots of conversation over cuts in salaries, for instance. So there was this eagerness and anxiety and that perplexity all over, and that desire to start it. And they were very, very hopeful, especially taking a cue from what happened in Germany when the Pundits last started, albeit in a form that is not very normal and usual to us. They were hoping that if all went well, at least they're going to start on the 1st of June. But as we stand with this new revelation that 6 of the players and staff have tested positive, with no names have been mentioned. And again, we've been told that quite a number of the other players and staff are going to be tested. What it means is that if testing is ramped up, we're going to hear a number of positive test cases. And whether that is going to strengthen the authorities to start the Premiership is another question altogether. I guess at the end of the day, I am particularly, as much as I love my football, which is a religion to many people, and we all cut funds down without football, I do not think that that is what should preoccupy us right now. Personally, I think that what should preoccupy us is where we're going to get a vaccine to end this threat to the whole world, as to whether we're going to get a cure for the vaccine. It's not necessarily about when we're going to start our football. So indeed, if the health authorities believe that starting our league would pose greater threat to the larger society, I think that is going to be postponed. But I really have my sympathies with football clubs around the world where they're losing money. For example, in the United Kingdom, particularly with the clubs out there. I mean, Liverpool, for instance, will be completely shattered that for the first time in 30 years, they would not be declared champions if it's cancelled. Are they going to use what they call the mathematics to determine the champions, what they call the weighted point system in the Premiership to determine the champions? I do not think that is what Liverpool will be looking for, to be giving the trophy on a silver platter. I think that they would want to get to the stadium with their fans there and celebrate in style. So it's very, very tight indeed. If you consider also how much money the clubs are losing over the period. The television broadcast networks are losing so much money. What happens to all the contractual agreements? And again, if the league is not started on time, what happens to the contracts of players, for instance? Are they going to be terminated? What are all the legal issues that we'll have to look at? It's very, very complex indeed. And I guess is the reason clubs around the world, particularly the Premiership, would have loved the league to start on the 1st of June. As we speak, I really have my doubts whether that is going to start. But as I indicated, I do not think that now that should be our preoccupation. As much as we're all in this together, I think our preoccupation should be the safety of the generality of the populace, as to whether or not if we go back to the football field, it would not endanger needlessly the lives of our fans and some of the players. And as we speak, some of the players have expressed their own disagreements over whether we should start the league or not. Tammy Abraham, for instance, has indicated that his father is asthmatic and he doesn't want to start the league when there is no certainty about any cure. What if he goes home and he has contracted the virus and his father catches it? So there are concerns. Opinions are really divided on this particular subject. And again, if we decide to start the league, Do we want the new normal to become the norm? For example, playing football behind closed doors, and the fact that there should be that social distancing when players are training. You're not supposed to tackle, but on the field of play, tackling is allowed. It's so bizarre. That is why I believe that as we speak, our preoccupation should be that divine intervention for our medical staff to ensure that we get a vaccine. If getting a vaccine would ensure the safety of everybody, and it means that cancelling the leagues, as is the case in Belgium, in the Dutch, and in France, I think so be it. Germany have started. I don't know how they're going to sustain it, but we wait and see how it will pan out in the Premiership. But for now, I think we should pray for a cure. And you and I know that it's going to take some time for the vaccine to become a reality.
Thank you. Yeah. Wow. Hello, Peter.
Hello.
Yes, I was asking that George's question had to do with the fact that do you think that with the latest developments in the Premier League today, some players having the coronavirus, it can begin in June?
I think it's looking less and less likely. Certainly, any optimistic notion of an early June resumption seems to be disappearing fairly fast. If anything, maybe towards the latter end of June is still more realistic. Listen, the fact that I think 6 members of personnel out of 748 tested today, I guess, I mean, none of us are experts. We're here as lovers of football and not necessarily understanders or articulators of the world of health or politics. But I guess 6 out of 748 was probably a statistical likelihood. In itself, I wouldn't have thought that it's a huge setback. I think there's an understanding, as has already been said, that within the great industry of football, there will be those, A, who are reluctant to return this promptly, and B, who, as a matter of fact, are going to find themselves face to face with the core problem itself. And if English football is going to resume, it's probably going to have to resume within that context, as in fact German football has. One of the second division teams in Germany, right up to the moment of restart, was riddled with coronavirus. And indeed in the Bundesliga itself, a couple of the teams, Paderborn, I think, were one right up to the last minute, who were very dubious about the restart because of individual cases. So 6 out of 748 in itself, I wouldn't have thought is especially alarming. Obviously, I say that in the context of what is overall a very alarming state of affairs. And the number of separate personal stories are what contribute to making this a really complex situation. Tammy Abraham's already been mentioned. The captain of Watford, Troy Deeney, has said over the last 48 hours or so that he is not prepared to go back and start training yet because he has a 5-month-old son with breathing difficulties. A lot of players, by the nature of the age they currently are, a lot of them have either perhaps a pregnant wife or an elderly mother or grandmother, and quite naturally they are concerned about their personal circumstances. But within this whole argument, I guess another facet is whether we consider football a separate industry, whether it deserves special circumstances whereby it can start, whether it is comparable with what you might call normal work. You know, in our country, construction workers have been sent back to building sites and are having to work more or less side by side. In what sense, you might ask, and I do so just rhetorically, in what sense are footballers any different from builders who also have families and so on to consider? It's such a complex business that it's almost insoluble in the context of one conversation.
Exactly, which is where I come to John Champion then. I mean, Peter has already mentioned Tammy Abraham, as has Kwabena Yeboah and Troy Deeney. What is your reading of the situation? Of course, you are a broadcaster, John, for ESPN's MLS coverage as well. What are you hearing from them? Because we know their start is also imminent.
Sure. I mean, it is multi-layered, as Peter has just laid out so graphically for all of us. So it's very difficult to have a grip on every level of this. and to feel like you've got anything approaching an overview. Just on the Premier League front, having worked in that environment for so long, I did make a couple of phone calls knowing I was coming on here tonight. And one of the people at one of the clubs I rang was one of the clubs which has had a positive test today. And so I was fascinated to know from them whether they thought that this would be the downfall of the entire plan. And their view was no. They're glad it's happened now. They anticipate there will be more positive tests going through. I mean, statistically, as Peter mentioned, that is going to happen. But they have got, if not inked in, then heavily penciled in June the 19th as their starting point for playing Premier League games. Now, there is government pressure to do so as well. That's another side to the debate. They are claiming that it would help national morale to have live Premier League football happening. It would certainly help the economy. On that point of national morale, I think it's instructive to look at a YouGov poll. YouGov is one of our most respected market research companies that carry out polls around general election campaigns, but was asked to poll the great British public, the adult public, as to how many of them would be positively affected by the return of Premier League football. And the answer, surprisingly to me and disappointingly to me, was a mere 18%. So it may be that that national morale issue is something of a red herring. Now, you asked me about my role on the other side of the Atlantic with Major League Soccer. And I had a call last week. I'm talking to you from the middle of England at the moment, asking whether I could go back to America in the middle of June because they're planning to restart at a quarantine tournament for all 26 of their clubs at the Wide World of Sports at Disney in Orlando, Florida. And the plan is that all the players should come in at the start of June, do all their training there whilst under quarantine, 4 weeks of it, then play a 5-week tournament. And I use tournament with inverted commas around it because it's just a way of dressing up a portion of what would be their regular league season. It would be a knockout event, but teams that were knocked out would still have to fulfill other fixtures that would count towards the league against other teams that had exited early. So the thought process there is that they can do that. That then gets them to mid-August. The games would take place over a 5-week period. And then they hope that things would have eased sufficiently across the United States that, albeit behind closed doors, each team would be allowed to play at their home stadium and they could have the rest of their regular season, which normally runs to 34 league games, and then in America, the obligatory end-of-season playoffs to decide the league title. They are fortunate in that they're only 2 games into a league season that began only in March, so they do have more time to play with. But their big obstacle at the moment is not a medical one, it's the players who are saying, look, we don't want to be away from our families for what could be 10 weeks in all. That's almost worse than being locked down at home. So there's a major wrestling match going on in the United States as to whether Major League Soccer will return on the 1st of July. They're very anxious to, because as you know, soccer is nowhere near the top sport in America. It's probably number 4, if not number 5 on the list. And they think if they can be one of the first professional sports back before the NFL season starts, ahead of the NBA, ahead of all the mainstream professional sports, the baseball as well, then it gives them a bit of a window on the world, a time in the spotlight that they wouldn't otherwise enjoy. But it will be behind closed doors if it does happen. And I should add that taking soundings around the world of football, I would be amazed if we see any games with a crowd during this calendar year, or indeed in the early part of next, looking at things from where we are at the moment.
Thank you very much, John Champion. A couple of comments coming in already, and you can also do so via PM Express # across board on social media. Asuma Johnson says that I think Peter makes a great point about it being multi-layered, and there's no easy answer. For me, I think that the emphasis on money is a huge problem for the Premier League. They are not thinking things as thoroughly as much as the Germans are because their situations are very different. Interesting point. Abna Yadom also says that John Champion in the MLS sounds so much like he does in the video game. Let's talk about something more serious. Let's talk about something more serious then. I think John's point about the MLS players not wanting to go to their families is something that we should think about seriously, because without players, there is no football. Without players, there is no football. And we should take their concerns as one of utmost importance ahead of club executives and businessmen and women. Good stuff. George, what have you got?
Yeah, of course, Gary, great stuff so far. Good to hear from all the guys, but it'll be nice to hear from Robert now. And Robert, can we spend a bit of time now on the African continent and talk about how we are, trying to get into the scheme of things? I know that the Africa Cup of Nations in 2021 will be taking place in January. Yes, we know that. But are you impressed with what you've seen so far in terms of what the Confederation of African Football is doing to try and find itself in the scheme of things?
Well, I think there's been a mixed bag of comments that have come through because different leagues have taken different decisions, and rightfully so, because the spread of COVID-19, especially across the African continent, has been somewhat different, or maybe less so than we've seen in Europe, where the numbers have been so staggering, and of course in America, which hit 19,000 by yesterday and is nearing 100,000 deaths. I mean, if you had to figure out what that means, and again, we use an analogy from here in South Africa, the very same stadium that hosted the opening match of the 2010 FIFA World Cup at the FNB Stadium, Soccer City, as it was known then. If you fill that to capacity, that is how many people have died in the United States of America. And if you get that picture of just human life and what that means, and you start to look at what it means for the Premiership players who've tested positive today, from the 700 odd that Peter was talking about earlier on, it is a low number. But then again, juxtapose that with the fact that now whoever's been in contact with those individuals, be it staff members, be it football players, they're going to have to go into a 14-day minimum quarantine, hoping that they don't show any signs. So that is time that is going to be taken. So imagine if a whole group of players within one team gets affected, and then they're going to go into quarantine, which means that for the next at least 14 days of a league that has come back into play, they cannot go and play any active football. So when you look at a scenario like that, and when you start to bring in the Africa Cup of Nations, and as I said in the previous show as well, that it's a Cup of Nations. We've got to bear that in mind. So it's not just happening within a controllable area of a country that has certain rules and restrictions. The fact that the Euros had to make a quick decision shows that they understand that it isn't just about one nation. It is about a culmination of different nations coming together with the different strains of the virus that are coming through. And you don't know how that's going to be affecting the tournament itself. So a decision needs to be made. And one has got to say to CAF again that yes, we understand. Yes, we also respect the fact that the tournament needs to go ahead. A lot has already been pushed back globally. I mean, the Olympic Games are off, and that is one of the biggest as well, if not the biggest sporting spectacle in the world again. But big decisions have to be made in time. Don't leave it until too late. I alluded earlier on to what the FIFA head of medical, the chairman of that medical committee, Michel Druge, what he said is that football is possible when contact is possible. So when you digest that, it says a lot, because you can't then just say in training we're doing it well, but then, I mean, we saw in the German Bundesliga, Thomas Müller, there was an elbow that was dished out there in the Bayern Munich game, etc. So that is already an immediate contact. Yes, people have said if you spit, you probably get a yellow card. But how possible is that going to be? What do we need to do? Do we need to set aside, a bucket per player, so that if a player feels like there's a build-up of phlegm, then he runs to their bucket? But the fact that players still remove their jerseys when they're celebrating a goal, even till now, shows that a yellow card might not just be the greatest thing. And players have to spit. Sweat has to fly around. It is a contact sport. So how do we find our way around for football? Do we find our way around to accommodate football? And as I said, 1 infection, 2 infections, 3 infections are not just about those people. The contact tracing means that we have to identify the people that have come into close proximity with those individuals. And what do? We then have to isolate. So they said from FIFA headquarters that football can only be possible at the earliest on the 1st of September. And trust me, we're nowhere near the 1st of September, and football is being brought back. And hats off to the Bundesliga. They've done what they've done. They've done the social distancing. We've seen the efforts that they've put in, post-match interviews. how they conduct them. We've seen other players sit on the bench as they're waiting to come in. The rolling substitutions, maybe 5 that they're going to be allowing. So those are efforts to say they want the football back. But the big debate is it pushing it too soon? And I would love to hear what the rest of the panel do think.
Stuff. George?
Excellent, Rob. Then back to you, Gary.
Yeah. Are you satisfied with the answer? Are you satisfied with the answer, George?
Very satisfied with the answer, Gary. The other question I would have loved to ask, and maybe I would like to ask Kwabena Yewad that question.
Sure.
Kwabena, I just want to find out from you, just a quick one. Do you think that players are properly or are being heard well in all of this? Are we really listening to the players? Because we hear a lot from administrators, we hear a lot, from the other guys in the industry, but we have not really heard from players. What do you think?
Well, I think that it's important to listen to the players, but you make a very valid point. I do not think so far we have taken the pain to listen to the players. We've just heard individual players express their views are being taken into consideration. As we alluded to, Dini and Tammy Abraham expressed concerns about the early return of football because of the consequences. The right decisions are not taken. So it's very tight. But I think that is the economic dimension which is really pushing the decision to really start the league on time. Because at the end of the day, I do not think it's only because people love football and people are missing football. I think that is the economic factor, the fact that the clubs are losing so much money and all the legal implications regarding the prolonged delay of football. Because, for example, as Robert alluded to on the African continent, if you talk about the Africa Cup of Nations, for instance, you do know that in recent times, CAF has succeeded in getting a number of sponsors on board. We know of Total, who have been sponsoring a CAF for some time. Suddenly, we had the likes of Yamaha, Continental, Nike, Visa, Adidas, all coming on board. If the Cup of Nations is not played, for instance, what are the implications? What are the consequences? And we do know that CAF rakes in so much money, for instance, from the Africa Cup of Nations. Indeed, is the biggest singular arena where they make so much money. So in the absence of that, they just cut funds down. And the reason they would love to push the button. But as you rightly said, are we listening to players who are the main actors? They've expressed concerns about whether or not they are safe getting to play football this early. And as I indicated earlier, if care is not taken, and already the medical experts have warned that if care is not taken and proper and stricter controls are not taken, we would have a second wave of pandemic who could be worse than the first one. It is a reason I believe that we must be very, very careful and cautious about how we approach all this, and understand that when this is all over, football will return. So there's no need to just rush into playing the sport only because we want to satisfy everybody economically. And I think that the players have to be listened to because they are the real actors. And already I know that the body that represents them should come out strongly on this particular subject and not just be driven by the economic factor.
Thank you very much, George. We'll come back to you, but this is the point where we start involving the audience, because this show obviously is not about the heavyweights, as distinguished as they are. I mean, if you take Peter Drury, John Champion, Kwabena Yewad, and Robert Marawa, between them, they've got about 130 years of experience between them. All of them. If you add all their experience together, that's more than any of my grandmothers has ever lived on this earth. I'm not sure about my family lineage, but yeah, I probably am right about that. Let's get a couple of questions out of the way for you. So what we'll do, guys, is just like bingo. We take one For alphabetical order, whose name comes first, George? Kwabna, Peter, John, Robert, Kwabna, Peter, Kwabna. All right, so let's take Kwabna, a question for Kwabna Eboa. Are these ones for Kwabna Eboa then? I think these are for Peter. Okay, so we'll jump the alphabet and get one for Peter. Peter, this is from Richard Hoynyefia Boni on Facebook. He says, what informs your diction on commentary? Your style of commentary is novel. Over to you, Peter.
What informs it is that's just who I am. So you can like it or loathe it. I always, when asked what advice one would give to an aspirant commentator, it is to try to be authentic. That is just who I am. I like words and I like football, and I'm lucky to do a job that combines the two. So it's no more complex than that. I'm afraid you can either love my words or you can not love them, I'm afraid that's just as simple as it is.
As a follow-up point, was there any time in your career where your style, of being poetic, of stringing the words, was not fashionable? Was there any point in your career like that, Peter?
Well, I've never really thought of it like that, because it's sort of implied in the answers of the previous question. I'm sure John would bear this out as well. I think you would be thinking rather too much of yourself if you set out to have some sort of style which you considered yours.
Okay.
You just go about doing the job as best as you can, and I suppose things do go in and out of fashion over the course of time. But broadly speaking, if you look at broadcasters over the years, they have been distinctive in their own particular ways, and have tended to succeed because they have stuck authentically to what they think is the right way of going about things. And I attempt to do that regardless of fashion. And anybody who knows me will tell you that fashion and me shouldn't really be mentioned in the same sentence anyway.
Great. John, the next question is yours then. This is from Benjamin Willie Graham, one of Ghana's preeminent commentators, also taking a cue from Kwabna Eboa, actually one of Kwabna Eboa's proteges. He sent in this and he's asking John, what has been the impact of COVID-19 to commentators like you, and what have been your engagements with other stakeholders to get the game back, John?
Okay, taking the last part of that question first, it's not really my job to have engagements with other stakeholders to get the game back. It's rather for me to be there when the game does come back. It's rather above my pay grade to be looking at when the game comes back and how that happens. In terms of my engagements, similar to Peter really, work dried up as soon as COVID-19 and the lockdown came. So I think we've both probably been largely twiddling our thumbs, going out, exercising when we can. I can only speak for myself. I've cycled about 2,000 miles since the lockdown began, and I've enjoyed doing that. It's probably done me a bit of good. I know that Peter likes his exercise as well. But there isn't a whole lot other than that. The other thing that I've done, and again, I think probably in tandem with Peter, is do all sorts of interviews with TV and radio stations and various podcasts from right around the world, which has been fascinating, really, to be able to connect with the viewers of our broadcasts for so many years. There's been a particular emphasis for me on stations in the United States as well, inquiring about Major League Soccer. But because of my background calling the Premier League for so long, you still have that interest from right around the globe. And it's lovely to hook up, just take a breath. It's rather like a punctuation point, an unscheduled punctuation point in one's career, where one can just assess what's really important in life. So it's certainly given me an awful lot of thinking time.
You said that work had dried up. Let me ask a round of questions before I come to Marawa, your specific question from our audience there. Now, wait for it. Work dried up. How much do you reckon have you lost, John, in this period of lockdown? How much money have you lost? This will go right around the table.
The only thing I would say on that is that I spent many years as a freelance, the last 6.5 years as a freelance, whereby you got paid per job. And then when I moved to America, and it was, I have to be honest and say it was one of the attractions, I actually went to a salaried position again, where your money arrives. Now, we've all had to take a hit in America. We all were asked to take a voluntary pay cut, which we did for a 3-month spell initially. And I don't think anyone could have argued with that, given these circumstances. So I feel particularly fortunate to be in a job still, and hopefully for the foreseeable future, despite the fact there being no work. I think the attitude of my employers, ESPN, who are part of the Walt Disney Company, is that eventually I'm going to have to work even harder than ever, particularly if this tournament comes off in Orlando. I'm going to be doing a couple of games every day of the week for probably 3 or 4 weeks. So I'll probably end up commentating on far more games than I would have done had my normal schedule pertained. So I feel particularly fortunate in that regard.
Meaning that for John Champion, for the audience, for the viewers, what he's saying in a very nice way is that things have dried up for now, but when things do restart, we're going to be counting the Benjamins, because he's going to be paid a lot of money from the US and the Walt Disney Company. Robert Marawa, how much money do you reckon have you lost? Your situation is quite unique because, I mean, I know you work for SABC, you still do your show, so this is a 2-in-1 question. You still do your show, which means that you still work, and you also have your own production house where you have your YouTube, production going. So you still work in your specific case. Tell us how you have not been too affected or how you have been affected by the lockdown.
Well, I think unlike the two gentlemen who I've had interactions with, which is John and Peter, during this coronavirus lockdown, they deal with the live event. So what Marawa TV has been all about is about dragging Peter, dragging John to come through and say, let's talk about the experiences. So mine is a non-live event. So we've done more shows than I could have ever imagined, because all of a sudden, people are sitting at home and they want to know what a Dwight York is up to, what a John Barnes is up to, what a Peter Drury or John is up to as well. So it's enabled one to bring a different perspective, whether it is from a local South African point of view, whether it's coaches or players or former players or just personalities within the game, to dragging on to some of the international greats that we've had. So for, Marawa TV, this has been, I wouldn't say a blessing in disguise, because it's new territory. People are trying to find their space and find their footing within the new way of doing broadcasts. And I suppose a lot of things will change. The days of big buildings and multi-story buildings, you might find that that's not going to be something that is sustainable anymore. People toned down the fact that all of us here are seated around, except for you guys in the studio. None of us have got a full-on camera, a professional camera that is focused on all of us. We're just using our little devices, whether it's an iPad, whether it's a phone, whether it's a laptop. So the bottom line is that it's changed the game. And I really, really think that moving forward, there'll be more interactivity. The fact that there's empty stadia right now means that you need to fill that gap at home, fill that gap with all sorts of information and interaction. And we can only just take pride that as an African continent, you're able to bring such top hitters as far as the world commentary is concerned. It says a lot about accessibility. It says a lot about the genuine love for the game, the genuine love for travel. And I know both of their stories as well. And I'm sure the president as well could allude to the fact that, football unites us. And just this conversation alone has proven how it does. We just need to be patient, because this invisible enemy that we are fighting right now is not done with its business yet.
As he says, football unites us. Where Robert is right now in South Africa, they are 2 hours ahead, meaning that it's 5 minutes after midnight in Jozi, in Johannesburg. John and Peter are in the United Kingdom. They are on British Standard Time, BST, where it's 11:06 p.m. there, an hour ahead of us. And Kwabena Eboa is ensconced here in good old Ghana, where it is 10:06 p.m. We are getting views, we are told, from as far as Tokyo, from Russia, from Nairobi, from Rio de Janeiro, and also from Bogota in South Africa. Plus, we see you, some of our guys in Miami, Dahumano, we see you in Miami, and we see you also in Denver, Zelda Boku as well. So, George, you have a question for Kwabena Eboa from the audience? Yes, we'll get to George momentarily, but I have to tell you that from now till the end of the show, the comments and the questions will be coming from you. We have done our bit. The next 23 minutes are yours. So head over to Twitter, to Facebook, bring in your questions, and let's get cracking with these legends of the game. George, that's all yours.
Right, so Gary, the next question is to Kwabena Eboa, and this question is coming from Yusuf Abdul Razak, and he's asking you an interesting question, Kwabena. He says, what advice would you give to the Ghana Football Association with regards to the league, the Ghana Premier League, and really the return of football in this country? He's trying to find out from you, what would you tell them, to cancel it or to hold them?
Well, I do know that Kedo Cricket, the president of the Ghana Football Association, as well as the executive and his executive committee members, are very determined to start the league. And I do know that they presented a proposal to the government through the Ministry of Youth and Sports to try and start the league because of the implications and the consequences of a total cancellation. For example, there's a suggestion that they should play behind closed doors, as has started in the Bundesliga. Is that sustainable in Ghana? And we find some of the club leaders arguing strongly that if they have to play behind closed doors, and that is led by Alhaji Grusa, who is the bankroller and founder of King Faisal, then every club has to be paid a minimum of $200,000 to play behind closed doors. Is that tenable? Does the FA have the money to play the league behind closed doors? We do know that even when the league was in a full throttle, the clubs suffered a great deal because in Ghana, unlike probably in the United Kingdom or in the major leagues around the world, players are paid paltry sums. And embarrassingly, some of our players take home at the end of the month a paltry $100 a month, and you're just wondering how they survive on $100 a month. You know, sponsorship is not coming through. They are struggling. Even at a time that we play the league and when the fans were at the stadium, only some of the top teams like Asante Kotoko, like Altobok, and in recent times, Lagos Cities were trying to bring the fans to the stadium. So if you want to play the league behind closed doors, and there's no way that the FA on its own can start the league without direct intervention from the central government. And from all indications, it doesn't look as if the central government is determined to allow our league to start within the context of even the hike in the numbers of those who have tested positive in recent times. As we speak, we're already nearing 6,000 positive cases. The recovery rate is quite encouraging, but I do not think that in the wake of this spike, the government will be determined to allow us to start our league. So it's looking increasingly like the league being cancelled is something that the Football Association doesn't want to hear at all. And let me use this platform to appeal to the central government. And it's something that a lot of people have already expressed concern. If we do not want our teams to collapse entirely, if the league is cancelled, I bet you quite a number of our teams could be extinct because even when they're active, they're struggling to survive. And I will add my voice to those who believe that if it is possible, the Ministry of Youth and Sports and the central government must, in a way, try and come to the aid of the Football Association and by extension, the clubs to ensure their survival. Because there is absolutely no way that if they do not benefit from a form of stimulus package from the central government, these clubs can't survive. As we speak, there's a suggestion that the players must take a pay cut. And you're just wondering, when the player is earning $100 a month, which pay cut are you talking about? It's absolutely impossible, you know? So it's very, very terrible as we find ourselves. And I think the only way for these clubs to survive is for the central government, if it's possible, to come to their aid. But as for the league starting anytime soon, I have my own doubt. Because yes, Germany have started, but if you check the protocols and the way they've gone about it, whether we have the capacity to emulate what has been started in the Bundesliga, and you ask yourself that if I mean, top leagues like the French league, the Dutch league, the Belgian league have all canceled their leagues. I'm just wondering how you think that we can start, particularly when the numbers are not getting down. So I would, in summary, add my voice to all those who believe that indeed these clubs need assistance. It's the only way they can survive. And as I indicated earlier, without that intervention, I can see quite a number of these clubs completely collapsing.
Kwabena, thank you very much. Now, more questions from now to the end of the show. That's all we are going to do. Questions. I'll let you in on a secret. I mean, the first hour was for us to pretend as if we're being serious. But really, what do you do when you've got all these legends here? You have fun. So that's exactly what we are going to do. So strike one. This is from Twitter. Abdul Hamid says, please ask Peter Drury and John Champion, and now this is a funny one, Peter and John, if they anticipate players in future FIFA and PS games to be wearing the option of nose masks and have social distancing as an option.
Funny enough, Gary, watching the Bundesliga, did you see that a lot of those substitutes who were wearing face masks,
yeah,
they had them in team colours and indeed already, and this shows how commercial football is already. The sponsors are on the mask. Incredible. They've not missed a beat in jumping on another opportunity there to make a few quid out of a face mask.
Good. So John, that's for you as well. That was for you as well.
Okay, well, I think maybe it's a one-off edition of PES or FIFA with face masks and presumably celebrations where the players touch elbows rather than hug each other. But I think, quite honestly, once we get to the stage, hopefully, of having a vaccine and we get back to proper football that we've known and loved throughout our lifetimes, we'll be very glad to forget about what it was really like during the times of COVID-19. So I'm not sure that those games would want to have face masks on for the next 4, 5, 6 years. Okay,
George, if you have your device with you, please go onto Twitter and let's get ready for you to ask a couple of questions. Yeah, George, that's for you. Now, let me do this round of questions. This is from Kosaki, and he wants it to go round the table. So, guys, if you are ready, Kosaki says, 1, is commentary an art or a science? Kwabena, you first. Is it an art or a science?
Well, first of all, I think basically you must have an interest in football. We're discussing football, so let me limit it to football. You must have an interest in football. And then, as a kid, maybe you would have taken inspiration from some of the commentators. So I'm sure, for example, as we speak, the number of guys who follow football, youngsters who are taking inspiration from Champion and Peter, and those who want to do presentation, for example, interested, will be taking a cue from Robert. So that must be there. And then you try and polish it. So let me use myself as an example. As a young kid, as young as about 11 years, I started developing that interest. And I take a cue from those who are taking the lead, like the legendary Harry Thompson, Joe Latte, Eric Beckham. So at a very tender age, as far back as 1982, in the Republic of Togo, when the Santiago Togo played in Africa Cup against Semasi, was the first time I was privileged to do some summaries for Eric Beckham, and then I picked it from there. And in 1984, during the SCSA tournament in Côte d'Ivoire, I was also privileged to continue on that trajectory. And then in 1987 in Liberia, also during the SCSA tournament, Supreme Council for Sports in Africa tournament, I continued from there. So you must first of all have that interest, and then as you go on, you polish that interest. And along the line, for instance, you attend some training courses to bring to the international level, as was the case for most African commentators during the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, where thanks to the former FIFA President Sepp Blatter, who insisted that the games in Africa must be commentated by African commentators, and for which reason a number of African commentators had to receive some form of training, and we were privileged to go to Paris for that polishing to bring you to that international standard. The same was done for us for the 2014 World Cup. So you must have that interest first and must then work towards it and polish the talent, because at the end of the day, you are influencing a lot of people. But as Peter said, regarding the style, as much as you take inspiration from people, you try to be authentic, you try to be yourself, because you have to restrict yourself to that individuality to be yourself. So, for example, Champion has got his own unique style, Peter has got his own unique style, Graham in Ghana has got his own unique style. So when the name is mentioned, when the voice starts rolling, even without the image, everybody knows who is behind it. So it's all a question of interest and then polishing the talent.
Peter and John, quickly, is this an art or a science? One word each, and then I go to Marawa for the main question, and I go for a break. So, John, you first. Is commentary an art or a science?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. It's not a science because I failed all my science exams at school, so it can't be a science. I'd like to think it's an art because it probably imbues us with more importance than we deserve. It's a great form of expression. The one thing it isn't is a job.
Yeah.
Peter?
I'm not clever enough to articulate it as well as John has. I think it would be pretentious to call it an art, and it's certainly not a science. I think if anything, it's probably an instinct.
Wonderful. Robert Marawa, before we go for the break, this was from Andrew Anoche Tremanting, says, you have the best sign-off ever. And this is a Ghanaian. He says, I want to know the meaning of what you say and why you say it.
Should we take it now after the break?
No, you're going to end the show with it. No, 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 no. No.
Oh, you know what it is? In South Africa, I think probably one of the most spoken languages is Zulu, or isiZulu, as it will be termed. So that's spoken mainly in KwaZulu-Natal, Durban, if you know that area. And when you say shelele in Zulu, it means you'll be back soon. So a play on the click. So when we go to the break, as we're about to go to the break, and as I'm taking this break away from you, Gary, I'm just going to be saying, we'll be back pretty soon with all of these experts and your comments. Say,
Producer, what are you waiting for? Go for